The crack of a gunshot echoed through the valley as Penelope Taylor clutched her father's pocket watch, ducking behind the overturned stagecoach. Blood seeped through her torn traveling dress, but it wasn't hers. It belonged to the driver who now lay motionless in the dirt. The year was 1876, and Penelope's journey to Oregon City had just become a nightmare. "Nobody moves and nobody dies," shouted a masked bandit, his revolver aimed at the terrified passengers. 3 men on horseback circled the disabled coach like vultures, their faces concealed by bandanas. Penelope held her breath. Her 23 years of sheltered Boston life hardly preparation for a stagecoach robbery in the Oregon Territory. Her letter of introduction to her uncle, her only living relative, and her only hope after her father's death was tucked safely in her bodice alongside the meager remains of her inheritance. "Valuables in the bag now," the leader thrust a burlap sack at the passengers. One by one they surrendered watches, money clips, and jewelry. When he reached Penelope, she hesitated. "I have nothing of value," she whispered, clutching her carpet bag. The man yanked it from her grasp. "We'll be the judge of that, lady." He emptied its contents onto the ground: a few dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a daguerreotype of her parents. Nothing worth stealing. With a disgusted grunt, he grabbed her arm, his fingers bruising her fair skin. "What about that?" He pointed to the gold chain disappearing into her collar. Penelope's hand flew protectively to her father's watch. "Please, it's all I have left of him." Something flashed in the bandit's eyes, perhaps recognition of her desperation. After a long moment, he released her and turned away. "Waste of our time," he muttered to his companions. "These folks are as poor as church mice." They mounted their horses, and with a cloud of dust, vanished into the foothills. The remaining passengers gathered their scattered belongings in shocked silence. The stagecoach guard, who had wisely hidden during the confrontation, emerged from behind a boulder. "Everyone all right?" he asked, checking the driver's body with a grim expression. "We're about 5 miles from Oregon City. I'll ride ahead for help. The rest of you should wait here." Penelope looked at the other passengers, an elderly couple who appeared shaken but unharmed, and a traveling salesman clutching his sample case. Her decision was swift. "I'll walk," she announced, gathering her carpet bag. "I can't afford to waste more time." "Miss, that's not wise," the guard cautioned. "There could be more bandits or wolves." "I've come too far to turn back now," she replied, straightening her spine. The truth was she couldn't bear to remain with the dead driver, his sightless eyes staring at the cloudless sky. The guard shrugged. "Your funeral, miss. Follow the road, keep the river on your right. You'll reach town before sundown if you're lucky." Penelope nodded and set off, her high-buttoned boots ill-suited for the journey but her determination unwavering. As Boston's skyline had disappeared behind her weeks ago, she'd promised herself she would forge a new life, no matter the obstacles. This was merely the first test of that resolve. The late afternoon sun beat down on her as she trudged along the rutted road, dust coating her traveling dress. Her thoughts drifted to her uncle, whom she had never met. Would he welcome his brother's daughter? His letters had been courteous but not warm. Still, he was her only hope. Hours passed, and as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Oregon City finally came into view. It wasn't much to look at: a collection of wooden buildings straddling the Willamette River, some nestled against a dramatic cliff face, others spread across the valley floor. Smoke curled from chimneys, and lanterns were being lit as darkness approached. Exhausted, Penelope stopped at the first establishment. She reached a general store with Whittaker's Mercantile painted on its weathered sign. A bell jangled as she entered, and several faces turned to study the newcomer. The proprietor, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, regarded her with curiosity. "Help you, miss? I'm looking for Horace Taylor," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's my uncle." The curious stares transformed into something else: discomfort, perhaps, or pity. "Old Horace Taylor," a woman whispered to her companion. "Lord have mercy." The storekeeper cleared his throat. "Miss Taylor, is it? I'm Martin Whitaker. Your uncle's place is about a mile north end of Oak Street." He hesitated. "But I should tell you what?" Penelope asked, alarm rising in her throat. "Has something happened to him?" No, he's alive and well," Whitaker assured her. "It's just that. Well, he's not what you'd call sociable. Keeps to himself since your aunt passed. Some folks around here." He trailed off, glancing at the other customers. "Some folks think he's touched in the head," supplied a weathered farmer bluntly. "Lives like a hermit in that run-down cabin, won't let nobody help him. I see." Penelope straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Whitaker. Could you direct me to Oak Street?" The storekeeper seemed relieved by her composure. "Of course. Just follow Main Street until you reach the church, then turn right. His place is at the very end, backs up against the forest. You can't miss it only house without a proper porch." Penelope thanked him and stepped back into the gathering dusk. As she walked through town, she felt eyes upon her from windows and doorways. Oregon City was clearly a place where newcomers were noticed and news traveled fast. The church was a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple. She turned right as instructed and continued down Oak Street. The houses grew progressively smaller and more modest. At the very end of the street, separated from its neighbors by an empty lot, stood a cabin that could only be her uncle's. It was sturdy but neglected, with weathered logs and a sagging roof. A single window glowed with firelight. As Whitaker had mentioned, there was no porch, just a crude step before the door. The small yard was overgrown, though a vegetable garden to one side showed signs of care. Penelope paused, gathering her courage, then approached the door and knocked firmly. For a long moment, there was no response. She knocked again. "Go away," came a gruff voice from within. "Whatever you're selling, I don't want it, Uncle Horace," she called. "It's Penelope, Edward's daughter." Silence, then the sound of a chair scraping across wooden floorboards. The door opened a crack and a single bloodshot eye peered out at her. "Edward's girl." The eye narrowed suspiciously. "Prove it." Penelope reached into her bodice and withdrew her father's pocket watch, opening it to reveal the inscription, "To Edward, my beloved brother, Horace." The door swung open wider, revealing a tall, gaunt man with a wild gray beard and the same sharp blue eyes as her father. He wore suspenders over a faded flannel shirt and his trousers were patched at the knees. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You look just like your mother." Penelope had braced herself for many reactions, but the lump that formed in her throat at those words caught her by surprise. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Horace hesitated, then stepped aside. "Place isn't fit for company," he warned. The interior was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a pot of something bubbling over the flames. A rough-hewn table and two chairs occupied the center of the room. A narrow bed stood in one corner, and a ladder led to what must be a sleeping loft above. "I got your letter," Horace said, closing the door behind her. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "I had nowhere else to go after Father died," Penelope admitted. "The creditors took everything," Horace grunted. "Edward always did have more ambition than sense." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." "You look about ready to drop." Penelope sank gratefully into the chair, setting her carpetbag beside her. "The stagecoach was robbed a few miles outside of town. I walked the rest of the way." This news seemed to surprise the old man. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and placed it before her with a chunk of bread. "Eat," he commanded. "We'll figure the rest out after." The stew was surprisingly good venison with wild onions and potatoes. Penelope hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the clink of spoons against bowls. When they finished, Horace pushed back from the table. "You can have the loft. It's not much, but it's clean. I'll fetch some water so you can wash up." "Thank you," Penelope said. "I won't be a burden, Uncle. I can cook and clean, and I'm a fair hand with a needle." Horace regarded her with those penetrating blue eyes. "This isn't Boston, girl. Life's hard out here, especially for a woman alone." "I'm not afraid of hard work," she replied evenly. and I'm a quick learner." A hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "You've got your father's stubbornness, that's certain." The smile faded. "But you should know folks in town, they don't take to me. Keep their distance. That'll extend to you if you stay here." "Why?" Penelope asked bluntly. Horace's face closed like a shutter. "That's a story for another day. Get some rest. Things'll look different in the morning." True to her uncle's warning, things did look different in the morning, but not in the way he meant. By daylight, Penelope could see that while the cabin was structurally sound, years of minimal maintenance had taken their toll. The roof needed patching, the single window was drafty, and the lack of a proper porch meant that every rainfall would turn the area before the door into mud. Horace had already left when she descended from the loft, but a note on the table informed her he had gone hunting and would return by midday. A pot of coffee sat warming by the banked fire. After a simple breakfast of leftover bread, Penelope decided to explore the property. The day was clear and mild, typical of Oregon in early autumn. Behind the cabin lay dense forest, but to the sides and front was enough cleared land for a decent-sized garden and perhaps a few animals. A small stream ran along one boundary of the property, providing fresh water. As she inspected the exterior of the cabin, a voice called out, "So you're Horace Taylor's niece." Penelope turned to find a tall man watching her from the edge of the property. His weathered face suggested he was in his early 30s, and he wore the practical clothing of a working man's sturdy trousers. A faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes the color of freshly turned earth. "I am," she replied, approaching the fence that separated her uncle's property from the empty lot. "And you are Vincent Wells." He touched the brim of his hat. "I own the property next door." Penelope glanced at the vacant lot. "It seems unoccupied." A smile creased his tanned face. "I've been clearing it, plan to build there come spring." He studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Town's been buzzing about your arrival. Not every day we get new folks, especially not ladies from back east." "Word travels fast," Penelope observed. "Small towns," Vincent shrugged. "No secrets here," he hesitated. "Folks are saying you plan to stay with your uncle." "That's correct." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Miss Taylor, your uncle's not the most welcomed man in these parts. There's history." "So I've gathered," Penelope replied coolly. "Though no one seems willing to tell me what that history is," Vincent sighed. "It's not my place. But I will say this, whatever happened in the past, your uncle keeps to himself and harms no one. I've never had trouble with him as a neighbor." Something in his tone suggested not everyone shared that view. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Wells." "Vincent, please." He smiled again, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "And if you need anything while you're getting settled, my place is just down the street." Blue house with the wagon out front. Before Penelope could respond, they were interrupted by the approach of three women walking up Oak Street. They slowed when they spotted Penelope and Vincent talking, exchanging meaningful glances before continuing forward. "Miss Taylor," called the eldest, a steel-haired woman in a severe black dress. "I'm Mrs. Gladys Perkins, head of the Ladies' Aid Society. These are Mrs. Helen Prescott and Miss Dorothy Watkins." The women regarded Penelope with expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion. "How do you do?" Penelope replied politely. "We've come to welcome you to Oregon City," Mrs. Perkins continued, though her tone suggested the opposite, "and to express our concern about your living arrangements." Vincent shifted uncomfortably beside Penelope. "My living arrangements." Penelope echoed, keeping her voice level. "It's not proper for a young, unmarried woman to live alone with a man, even a relation," Mrs. Prescott interjected, "especially one with your uncle's reputation." "What exactly is my uncle's reputation?" Penelope asked, her patience wearing thin. The women exchanged glances. "Your uncle has been estranged from proper society for many years," Mrs. Perkins said delicately. "After your aunt's passing, he refused all Christian charity and assistance. Some say he blames the town for what happened, though that's nonsense, of course. What did happen to my aunt? Penelope pressed. Miss Watkins, the youngest of the three, opened her mouth as if to speak, but Mrs. Perkins silenced her with a look. That's not important now, the older woman said dismissively. What matters is that this situation is entirely inappropriate. We've come to offer you lodging with one of our respectable families until more suitable arrangements can be made. Penelope felt a surge of indignation on her uncle's behalf, though she barely knew the man. That's very kind but unnecessary. I'm perfectly comfortable with my uncle, Mrs. Perkins' lips thinned. Miss Taylor, perhaps you don't understand. Your uncle is not welcome in polite society. If you align yourself with him, neither will you be. Is that a threat, Mrs. Perkins? Penelope asked quietly. A friendly warning, the woman replied, though there was nothing friendly in her tone. This is a God-fearing community with standards of behavior. Your uncle has chosen to live outside those standards. We had hoped you might be salvageable. Vincent Wells, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Ladies, I think Miss Taylor has had a long journey and needs time to settle in. Perhaps this discussion could wait for another day. Mrs. Perkins turned her steely gaze on him. Mr. Wells, this doesn't concern you. Actually, he replied evenly, as Miss Taylor's neighbor, I consider her well-being very much my concern. A tense silence fell over the group, broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Horace Taylor appeared, a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder and a rifle in his hand. His expression darkened when he saw the gathering outside his property. What's all this? He demanded, coming to stand beside Penelope. Just welcoming your niece to town, Mrs. Perkins replied with a brittle smile, and offering her some alternatives to her current situation. Horace's blue eyes flashed. She's my brother's daughter, her place is here if she wants it. That's what we're afraid of, Mrs. Prescott muttered, not quite under her breath. Horace's face hardened. Said your piece. Good, now get off my property. The women withdrew, affronted dignity in every line of their bodies. As they retreated down Oak Street, Mrs. Perkins called back, Our offer stands, Miss Taylor. When you come to your senses, any of us will help you find a proper situation. Horace snorted and turned to Vincent. You too, Wells. Don't need your interference. Vincent held up his hands placatingly. No interference intended, Mr. Taylor, just being neighborly. He touched his hat to Penelope. Madam, the offer of help extends to both of you. With that, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street. Horace watched him go with a scowl. Best not to get too friendly with the neighbors, he advised, heading toward the cabin door. They'll only disappoint you in the end. Penelope followed her uncle inside, her mind whirling with questions. As he began skinning the rabbits at the table, she gathered her courage. Uncle Horace, what happened to make the town turn against you? His hands stilled, and for a moment Penelope thought he might refuse to answer. Finally, he sighed deeply. Your Aunt Martha died of fever 10 years ago, he said, his voice rough. The town doctor refused to come out here to treat her, said he was too busy with more important patients in town. His face twisted with old pain. By the time I got her to him, it was too late. She died that night. That's terrible, Penelope said softly, but why would the doctor refuse? Horace resumed his work on the rabbits, his movements precise and controlled. Martha was half Kalapuya native to these parts. We met when I first came west, before Oregon City was much more than a trading post. Her people had been here for generations. A rare smile softened his features. Smartest, strongest woman I ever knew, understanding dawned on Penelope. They didn't approve of your marriage. Some did, some didn't, Horace shrugged. But when the new settlers started pouring in, attitudes hardened. Martha was suddenly not good enough for their precious society. His voice grew bitter. After she died, I may have said some things, done some things that the town hasn't forgiven. Nor have I forgiven them. Penelope absorbed this information, her heart aching for her uncle's loss. And that's why Mrs. Perkins said I wouldn't be welcome if I stayed with you. Horace looked up, his expression softening. You don't have to stay, girl. I'm used to being alone. Don't need you suffering for my sake. I'm not going anywhere, Penelope said firmly. You're my family, and I don't abandon family. Something like respect flickered in Horace's eyes. You'll regret that noble sentiment when winter comes and this drafty old place has you shivering in your boots. Then we'll fix it, Penelope replied simply. I noticed the roof needs patching and a proper porch would keep mud from being tracked inside. Horace barked a laugh. Just like that, eh? You got carpentry skills I don't know about. No, Penelope admitted, but I can learn. And in the meantime, perhaps we could hire someone. With what money? Horace challenged. My trapping and hunting keeps food on the table, but there's precious little extra. Penelope reached into her bodice and withdrew a small pouch. I have some savings. Not much, but enough to make improvements. Horace stared at the pouch, then at his niece. Your father's daughter through and through, he muttered, though there was grudging affection in his voice. Always charging ahead without looking. I prefer to think of it as being practical, Penelope countered. This is my home now too. I want to make it comfortable for both of us. Her uncle shook his head but didn't argue further. They spent the remainder of the day preparing the rabbits for stew and discussing what improvements the cabin most urgently needed. By evening, Penelope had a mental list and a determination to begin implementing changes the very next day. As predicted, word of Penelope's decision to remain with her uncle spread quickly through Oregon City. When she ventured into town the following morning to visit the mercantile, she was met with curious stares and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Martin Whitaker, at least, was professionally courteous as he helped her gather the supplies on her list: nails, tar paper for the roof, lamp oil, and basic foodstuffs. Planning some repairs? He asked, eyeing her purchases. Yes, the cabin needs attention before winter, Penelope replied. I don't suppose you could recommend someone skilled in carpentry. We'd like to add a porch, among other things. Whitaker looked uncomfortable. Most builders in town are pretty busy this time of year, getting things ready for winter. What he didn't say was that most would refuse to work for Horace Taylor, but Penelope heard the unspoken message clearly. I understand, she said. If you think of anyone who might be available, please let me know. As she gathered her purchases, the bell above the door jangled and Vincent Wells entered the store. He nodded to Penelope, then approached the counter. Morning, Whitaker. Got that order of hinges I asked about? Just came in yesterday, the storekeeper replied, producing a small package from beneath the counter. Vincent thanked him, then turned to Penelope. Need help carrying those supplies, Miss Taylor? Penelope hesitated. Her uncle's warning about getting too friendly with neighbors echoed in her mind, but practicality won out. The supplies were too much for her to carry alone. That would be kind of you, Mr. Wells, she replied. As they left the store, Penelope felt the weight of stares from other customers, but she held her head high. Vincent carried the heavier items and they walked in comfortable silence for several blocks. I couldn't help overhearing, he finally said. You're looking for someone to build a porch. Among other repairs, Penelope confirmed, but Mr. Whitaker didn't seem optimistic about finding someone. Vincent adjusted his grip on the supplies. It's not lack of skill that's the problem, it's your uncle. Because of his marriage to my aunt, Penelope asked directly. Vincent glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. He told you about Martha, some. Enough to understand why the town shuns him. Vincent nodded slowly. Martha was a fine woman. My father thought highly of her. He was one of the few who treated your uncle and aunt with respect. Not that it matters now, but there are some of us who don't share the town's prejudices. They had reached Oak Street and Penelope slowed her pace. Mr. Wells, Vincent, do you know of anyone who might be willing to help with the repairs? I have some money saved. Vincent was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. As it happens, I'm handy with tools myself, built my own place down the street. The blue house with the wagon out front, Penelope recalled. He smiled at that. That's right. I work as a farrier and blacksmith mostly, but I started out in construction when I first came west. He hesitated. I could help with your repairs if you'd allow it, for a fair price, of course. Penelope felt a surge of relief. That would be wonderful. When could you start? I could come by tomorrow to assess what needs doing, Vincent offered. Though I should warn you, your uncle might not take kindly to my involvement. Leave my uncle to me, Penelope said with more confidence than she felt. Shall we say 9 o'clock tomorrow? Vincent agreed, and they completed the walk to the cabin. Horace was nowhere to be seen out checking his traps, Penelope assumed. Vincent helped her carry the supplies inside, then tipped his hat and departed with a promise to return the next morning. When Horace returned late that afternoon, Penelope steeled herself for the conversation ahead. I found someone to help with the repairs, she announced as her uncle hung his hat by the door. That's so? Horace raised a bushy eyebrow. Who in this God-forsaken town would work for me? Vincent Wells, Penelope replied, watching her uncle's reaction carefully. He's coming tomorrow to assess what needs doing. Horace's face darkened. Wells, you've been talking to that man behind my back. Hardly behind your back, Penelope countered. He helped me carry supplies from town, and when he heard we needed repairs, he offered his services. He's skilled and willing, which is more than can be said for anyone else in Oregon City, apparently. Horace paced the small room like a caged animal. Don't need his charity. It's not charity. I'm paying him a fair wage from my own savings, Penelope insisted. Uncle Horace, be reasonable. Winter will be here before we know it. The roof leaks, the window lets in drafts, and a proper porch would make a world of difference. Her uncle continued to scowl, but she could see his resistance weakening. His father was a decent man, he finally admitted, only one who stood by us when Martha fell ill. Then perhaps the son takes after him, Penelope suggested gently. At least meet with him tomorrow before making up your mind. Horace grunted, which Penelope chose to interpret as agreement. The subject didn't come up again that evening, though her uncle was quieter than usual as they ate their supper. Vincent arrived promptly at 9 the next morning. He wore work clothes and carried a leather satchel of tools. Horace was waiting on the single step outside the cabin, his expression guarded. Mr. Taylor, Vincent greeted him respectfully. Miss Taylor mentioned you're looking to make some improvements before winter. Horace studied the younger man through narrowed eyes. My niece seems to think we need help. I'm not convinced. Vincent didn't rise to the bait. Mind if I take a look around? No obligation. I'll tell you what I think needs doing, and you can decide if it's worth pursuing. After a tense moment, Horace stepped aside. Suit yourself. Vincent spent the next hour examining the cabin, thoroughly checking the roof, testing the window frames, inspecting the foundation, and measuring the area in front of the door where a porch might go. Penelope accompanied him, asking questions and taking mental notes while Horace watched from a distance, arms crossed defensively over his chest. Finally, Vincent approached the older man. Structure's sound, which is good news. But you've got significant water damage to the northeast corner of the roof that needs addressing before the rainy season. Window frames need recaulking, and that chimney could use some work to make it draw better. Horace said nothing, but his posture relaxed slightly. As for the porch, Vincent continued, it's straightforward enough. Would give you a dry place to remove muddy boots and provide some protection from the elements. I could build something simple but sturdy in about a week, working around my other obligations. And what would all this cost? Horace asked gruffly. Vincent named a figure that seemed reasonable to Penelope. That includes materials and labor. If you have preferences about the design, we can discuss those. Horace looked to Penelope, who nodded encouragingly. Fine, he finally said, but I work alongside you. Won't have it said that Horace Taylor can't contribute to his own home's upkeep. A smile broke across Vincent's face. Wouldn't have it any other way, Mr. Taylor. 2 pairs of hands make lighter work than one. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? After a moment's hesitation, Horace shook it. Deal. But understand this, I'm doing this for my niece's comfort, not my own. Of course, Vincent agreed, though his eyes twinkled with something like amusement. "Shall we start tomorrow? I'll bring the lumber and supplies." With the arrangements made, Vincent departed, and Penelope turned to her uncle with a triumphant smile. "That wasn't so difficult, was it?" Horace harumphed. "We'll see if he actually shows up." But there was less bite in his tone than usual. True to his word, Vincent arrived early the next morning with a wagon load of lumber and supplies. To Penelope's surprise, Horace was already up and waiting, dressed for work, and with a determination in his eyes she hadn't seen before. The two men set to work immediately, starting with the roof repairs. Penelope insisted on helping where she could, holding tools, fetching water, and preparing meals for the workers. By midday, they had made significant progress on patching the damaged section of roof. As they ate the lunch, Penelope had prepared thick sandwiches of cold venison and fresh bread she'd baked that morning. Vincent shared stories of other buildings he'd worked on in the area. "You built the new schoolhouse?" Penelope asked, impressed. Vincent nodded, along with several others. The town was growing fast a few years back, lots of construction work to be had. "And now you're a farrier?" she asked. "The building boom slowed," he explained. "I've always been good with metal and animals, so it seemed a natural shift. Still do carpentry when the opportunity arises, though." Horace, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly asked, "Your father, he's still around?" A shadow crossed Vincent's face. "Passed 3 winters ago, pneumonia took him." "Sorry to hear that," Horace said gruffly. "He was a good man." "Yes, he was," Vincent agreed. "Taught me everything I know about standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular." A look of understanding passed between the two men, and Penelope sensed a shift in her uncle's attitude toward their helper. The work continued through the afternoon, and by sunset, the roof was secure. Vincent promised to return the next day to begin work on the porch, and this time, Horace's goodbye was noticeably less hostile. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Vincent would arrive early, work with Horace on whatever task was planned for the day, share the midday meal with them, then continue working until the light began to fade. During these hours, Penelope found herself increasingly drawn to the young blacksmith. He was intelligent and well-spoken, despite his lack of formal education. He treated her uncle with respect, never condescending or impatient even when Horace was being particularly difficult. And he seemed genuinely interested in Penelope's opinions and ideas, asking her input on the porch design and listening attentively when she spoke. On the 4th day, as they worked on setting the posts for the porch, Horace was called away by a neighbor who needed help with a trapped animal. Left alone, Penelope and Vincent continued the work, their conversation flowing easily. "Have you always lived in Oregon City?" Penelope asked, holding a post steady while Vincent secured it. "Since I was 12, he replied. "My father brought us west after my mother died." He believed the frontier offered opportunities that couldn't be found back east. Was he right? Vincent considered this. In some ways, there's freedom here that doesn't exist in more settled places, room to build something of your own. His hands, strong and capable, worked the saw with practiced ease. But there are challenges too. People can be just as narrow-minded here as anywhere. "I've noticed," Penelope said dryly. Vincent glanced at her, his expression serious. "The Ladies' Aid Society giving you trouble?" "Not directly," she admitted. "But I'm aware of the whispers when I go into town, the way conversations stop when I approach." "Small minds," Vincent said dismissively. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." "I'm not so sure," Penelope replied. "It seems the prejudice against my uncle, and by extension, me, runs deep." Vincent set down his tools and faced her directly. "Penelope, Miss Taylor, may I speak plainly?" The sudden formality made her heart beat faster. "Of course. There are those in town who will never accept your uncle because of his marriage. Their minds are set and nothing will change them." His eyes, warm and earnest, held hers. "But not everyone feels that way. Some of us believe a person should be judged by their character, not by who they love or where they come from." Like your father, Penelope said softly. Like my father, Vincent agreed. And like me. Something in his tone made her breath catch. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps announced Horace's return, and the moment passed. But something had changed between them. In the days that followed, Penelope found herself increasingly aware of Vincent's presence, the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders as he worked, the rich timbre of his laugh when something amused him, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her navigate the construction site. The porch began to take shape, a sturdy platform extending 6 feet from the front of the cabin, with steps leading down to the yard and the beginnings of a railing around the perimeter. Horace, to Penelope's surprise, seemed energized by the project, working alongside Vincent with growing camaraderie. One evening, after Vincent had departed, Horace surprised Penelope further by saying, "That Wells boy isn't half bad." Penelope, who had been preparing vegetables for stew, smiled at the grudging compliment. "No, he isn't." Horace gave her a shrewd look. "Noticed you two getting friendly." Heat rose to Penelope's cheeks. "He's been very kind." Horace stroked his beard thoughtfully. His father would approve. Martha would too. The mention of her aunt startled Penelope. Horace rarely spoke of his late wife. "Why do you say that?" Martha believed in connections between people, said they were more important than rules made by those with no understanding of love. A distant look came into his eyes. "She'd like you, girl, got the same fire in you that she had." Penelope was touched by this unexpected glimpse into her uncle's past. "I wish I could have known her." "So do I," Horace said simply. He rose from his chair and headed toward the door. "Going to check my traps. Don't wait up." Left alone, Penelope pondered her uncle's words and the growing feelings she couldn't deny. Vincent Wells had begun to occupy her thoughts in a way no man ever had before. But was she reading too much into his kindness? And even if she wasn't, what future could there be for them in a town that had already decided she was unwelcome? The next day brought unexpected visitors. Penelope was alone at the cabin, Horace having gone to sell some pelts in a neighboring settlement, and Vincent delayed by urgent work at his forge when 3 riders approached. She recognized them as men from town, though she didn't know their names. "Miss Taylor," called the leader, a stocky man with a florid face. "We've come to deliver a message." Penelope stepped onto the half-finished porch, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, town council met last night," the man continued. "There's concern about the improvements being made here." He gestured to the porch. "Property doesn't belong to you or your uncle, strictly speaking. It's leased from the county." "I was unaware of that," Penelope replied carefully. "My uncle has lived here for many years." "By sufferance," the second man interjected. Annual lease was paid through hunting rights in the surrounding forest, but permanent improvements require council approval. Penelope's hands clenched at her sides. "And I suppose the council is disinclined to grant such approval?" The men exchanged glances. "Council suggests you and your uncle might be more comfortable elsewhere. There's land available further out, away from town." The meaning was clear. They wanted Horace, and now Penelope pushed even further to the margins of society. "I'll convey your message to my uncle," Penelope said, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "Though I'm curious why this lease arrangement hasn't been mentioned in all the years he's lived here." The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Times change, miss. Town's growing. Standards need to be maintained." "I see." Penelope's tone could have frozen water. "Is there anything else?" "Just this," said the first man. "Vincent Wells is putting his reputation at risk by associating with your uncle. He's a respected craftsman in these parts. Would be a shame if that changed." The threat, thinly veiled as concern, made Penelope's blood boil. "Mr. Wells is free to choose his own associates, as am I. Good day, gentlemen." She turned and entered the cabin, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched the men linger a moment longer before riding away. Fury and frustration warred within her. Just as she was beginning to feel at home, to forge connections, the town's prejudice threatened to upend everything. And now they were dragging Vincent into it, threatening his livelihood because he had shown kindness to her and her uncle. When Vincent arrived an hour later, Penelope was still seething. She recounted the visit, watching his expression darken as she spoke. "Cowards," he muttered when she finished. "Coming here when they knew Horace was away." "Is it true about the lease?" Penelope asked. Vincent sighed. "Technically, yes. Many of the outlying properties are on county land, but no one's ever enforced the improvement clause before." He ran a hand through his hair. "This is about pushing your uncle further out, making him and you someone else's problem. And their threat against you," his eyes met hers, determination evident in their depths. "Let them try. I answer to my conscience, not town gossip." Penelope's heart swelled at his words. "I can't ask you to risk your standing in the community for our sake." "You're not asking," Vincent replied simply. "I'm choosing." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Penelope, I need you to know something. My interest in helping here goes beyond neighborly kindness." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that from the moment I saw you standing in your uncle's yard, proud and determined despite everything, I knew you were someone special." His hand, calloused but gentle, reached for hers. "I find myself thinking about you when we're apart. Wondering what makes you smile, what your dreams are, who you hope to become in this new place." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "Vincent, I know it's soon," he continued earnestly, "and I know there are complications. But I'd like your permission to court you properly if you're not opposed to the idea." Joy bloomed in Penelope's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "I'm not opposed," she whispered. "Not at all." His smile lit up his entire face. "Then those men who came today should know their threats only strengthen my resolve. I'll stand by you and your uncle, whatever comes." When Horace returned that evening, they told him everything: the visit from the townsman, the lease issue, and, with some trepidation, Vincent's declaration of interest in Penelope. To their surprise, Horace laughed a rusty sound, as if long unused. "Knew this land wasn't truly mine," he admitted. "Always expected they'd find a way to push me out eventually, but I never thought they'd have to contend with the likes of you two." He looked between them, something like pride in his weathered face. "So, Wells, you want to court my niece?" Vincent straightened. "Yes, sir, with your blessing." Horace studied him for a long moment. "Martha would say the heart knows its own mind. If Penelope's heart has chosen you, who am I to argue?" His expression grew serious. "But understand this: loving someone others disapprove of isn't easy. Town already has it in for you because you're helping us. It'll get worse if you formally attach yourself to my niece." "I understand the risk," Vincent replied steadily, "and I accept it." "Then you have my blessing," Horace said gruffly. "Now, about this lease business." The three of them discussed options late into the night. Moving further from town would isolate them even more and make it difficult for Penelope to find employment if needed. Fighting the council seemed futile given the entrenched prejudice. Ultimately, they decided to continue the improvements while Vincent made discreet inquiries about purchasing the land outright, a long shot, but worth pursuing. The next morning, they resumed work on the porch with renewed determination. By midday, the structure was nearly complete, a solid, well-crafted addition to the cabin that would provide shelter from the elements and a comfortable place to sit in the evenings. As they took a break for lunch, a wagon appeared on Oak Street, making its way toward the cabin. Penelope recognized Martin Whitaker from the mercantile at the reins. "More trouble," Horace muttered, rising to his feet, but when Whitaker pulled up before the cabin, his expression wasn't hostile. "Morning, folks," he called, climbing down from the wagon. "Got a delivery for you, Miss Taylor." Penelope approached cautiously. "I didn't order anything, Mr. Whitaker." "Not from me, no." The storekeeper reached into the wagon and withdrew a large object wrapped in burlap. "This came in on yesterday's stage, addressed to you, care of my store." Curious, Penelope accepted the package. It was heavy and oddly shaped, Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed a beautiful brass lantern with glass panels and an ornate hanging hook. "There's a note," Whitaker said, handing her a folded piece of paper. Penelope opened it and read aloud, "For your new porch. May it light your way home always. Your friend, Dorothy Watkins." Dorothy Watkins, the youngest member of the Ladies' Aid Society who had visited with Mrs. Perkins that first day. "Well, I'll be damned," Horace said softly. Whitaker shuffled his feet. "Miss Watkins asked me to tell you she's sorry for not speaking up before. Said she admires your loyalty to family." He glanced at the nearly completed porch. "Nice work, by the way. Place looks better already." With that surprising endorsement, he climbed back into his wagon and departed, leaving them staring after him in confusion. "What just happened?" Penelope wondered aloud. Vincent smiled. "I believe you've found an ally, Miss Taylor." "Or perhaps the beginnings of change," she replied thoughtfully, running her fingers over the beautiful lantern. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Vincent mounted the lantern on a specially crafted hook beside the cabin door. When lit, it cast a warm, welcoming glow across the new porch, transforming the cabin's appearance entirely. Penelope, Vincent, and Horace sat together on the porch steps, admiring their work and the beautiful lantern that symbolized an unexpected friendship. "It's not much," Horace admitted, looking at the simple structure, "but it's more than I've had in years." "It's perfect," Penelope assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder in a rare moment of physical affection. "Thank you for letting me stay, Uncle Horace." The old man cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Cabin feels more like a home with you in it, girl. Reminds me of better days." Vincent, sitting on Penelope's other side, reached for her hand. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "Whatever the town council decides, we'll face it together." The three of them sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the lantern's glow a beacon of hope against the encroaching night. Word of the porch and lantern spread through Oregon City like wildfire. Over the next few days, curious townspeople found reasons to walk or ride past the end of Oak Street, observing the transformation of Horace Taylor's long-neglected cabin. Some merely gawked. Others nodded cautiously when they caught sight of Penelope or Vincent. A few even called out greetings. Dorothy Watkins became a regular visitor, often bringing small gifts, fresh baked goods, cuttings from her garden, once even a kitten from her cat's recent litter, which promptly made itself at home in Horace's cabin. Through her, Penelope began to form tentative connections with other, more open-minded residents of the town. Vincent continued his courtship, taking Penelope for walks along the river when weather permitted, bringing her books he thought she might enjoy, and sharing stories of his dreams for the future. Their feelings for each other deepened with each passing day, their connection strengthened by the challenges they faced together. The town council, perhaps sensing shifting attitudes among some residents, took no immediate action regarding the lease violation. Vincent's discreet inquiries about purchasing the land produced no results, but neither did any official move to evict them. As autumn deepened toward winter, Vincent and Horace made further improvements to the cabin, reinforcing the chimney, recaulking the window, and adding storm shutters that could be closed during the worst weather. The interior was transformed as well, with Penelope's touches bringing warmth and comfort to the once Spartan space. One crisp November evening, as the three of them sat around the fire after supper, Vincent cleared his throat nervously. "I have something to ask you both," he began, his usually confident manner replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. "As you know, I've been clearing the lot next door, planning to build in the spring." Horace nodded. "Been watching your progress. Solid foundation plan. Thank you." Vincent took a deep breath. "The thing is, I've been rethinking my plans. That lot is close to town, which has advantages but also complications." He glanced meaningfully at Penelope. "I've found another piece of land about 2 miles south. Good water access, excellent soil for farming, plenty of room for expansion. Penelope's heart began to race as she sensed where this was leading. "I'd like to build there instead," Vincent continued. "A larger house than originally planned, room enough for a family." His eyes met Penelope's. "And I'd like to know if you, Penelope Taylor, would consider becoming my wife and sharing that home with me." Joy surged through her, but she hesitated, glancing at her uncle. "I couldn't leave Uncle Horace." Vincent smiled. "I thought you might say that. Which is why my plans include a separate cabin on the property for your uncle if he's agreeable. Close enough for family but with privacy for all." Horace looked stunned. "You'd want an old grump like me as a neighbor. I've grown rather fond of your grumpiness," Vincent replied with a grin. "And I know how important family is to Penelope. Besides, I could use your expertise in hunting and trapping. The land has excellent forest access." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at this thoughtful solution. "Vincent, are you certain?" The town can think what it likes," Vincent interrupted firmly. "I love you, Penelope Taylor. I want to build a life with you, a home where we're both free to be exactly who we are, surrounded by those we care about." He took her hands in his. "What do you say?" "Yes," Penelope whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Horace cleared his throat gruffly. "Suppose I could be persuaded to relocate if there's good hunting grounds." But his eyes shone with unshed tears as he watched his niece's happiness. The wedding took place on Christmas Day in the small church at the edge of Oregon City. To everyone's surprise, Reverend Johnson had agreed to perform the ceremony despite pressure from certain members of his congregation. "The Lord's house is open to all who seek his blessing," he had stated firmly when questioned. The church wasn't full, but neither was it empty. Dorothy Watkins came, of course, along with Martin Whitaker and his wife. Several of Vincent's clients attended, as did a few families who had begun to reconsider their stance on Horace Taylor and his niece after seeing the positive changes of recent months. Penelope wore a simple dress of deep blue wool, trimmed with lace that Dorothy had helped her sew. Vincent cut a handsome figure in his best suit, his eyes never leaving his bride's face throughout the ceremony. And Horace, clean-shaven for the occasion and wearing a new shirt that Penelope had insisted on, gave his niece away with gruff pride. Outside the church, a light snow began to fall as the newlyweds emerged. They would spend their wedding night in Vincent's home in town, then begin work on their new property as soon as weather permitted. "They said you'd never be welcome here," Vincent murmured to his bride as they stood on the church steps, snowflakes catching in her hair. "But look at you now, Mrs. Vincent Wells, with friends and family around you." Penelope's eyes shone with happiness. "All because a stubborn cowboy built me a porch and hung a lantern." "The lantern was from Dorothy," Vincent reminded her with a smile, "but the porch was all you," she countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "A beginning, you called it, and you were right." As they descended the steps to the waiting wagon that would carry them to their temporary home, Horace called out, "Don't forget, I expect that cabin to be ready by spring planting." Laughter followed them as Vincent helped Penelope into the wagon and climbed up beside her. With a flick of the reins, they were off, heading toward their first night as husband and wife, and the promise of a future built with their own hands. Spring arrived with bursts of wildflowers across the meadows and new green leaves unfurling in the forests. On the property south of Oregon City, a house took shape larger than the original cabin, with generous windows to catch the light and a wide, welcoming porch that wrapped around two sides. Nearby, a smaller cabin neared completion as well. Horace's new home, built with the same care and attention to detail as the main house. The older man had thrown himself into the construction with unexpected energy, his skills as a woodsman proving invaluable as they cleared the necessary trees and prepared the land for both buildings. Penelope, now 5 months pregnant with their first child, supervised the interior finishings and planted an ambitious garden. Marriage and impending motherhood suited her. Her cheeks glowed with health, and happiness shone in her eyes as she watched her vision of home take shape around her. The town's attitude had shifted gradually over the months since the wedding. While some still held to old prejudices, many had been won over by Vincent and Penelope's obvious devotion to each other, and by Horace's visible transformation from bitter recluse to active community member. The old man still preferred the company of trees to people most days, but he no longer avoided town entirely and had even begun teaching a few interested young men his tracking and trapping skills. On the day they moved into their new home, a surprising procession of wagons followed them from town. Dorothy Watkins with houseplints and curtains she'd sewn as gifts, Martin Whitaker with a rocking chair for the porch, even Mrs. Prescott from the Ladies' Aid Society with a handmade quilt for the baby. Not everyone came, of course. Mrs. Perkins and her closest allies remained staunchly opposed to what they saw as Vincent's betrayal of proper society. But enough people made the journey to suggest that hearts and minds were indeed changing. As the sun began to set that first evening in their new home, Vincent hung the brass lantern, the one Dorothy had sent that fateful day, beside the front door of their house. Identical lanterns flanked Horace's cabin door as well, a symbol of the connection between the two homes. "Well, Mrs. Wells," Vincent said, slipping his arm around his wife's expanding waistline as they stood on their new porch, watching the lantern's glow strengthen against the deepening twilight. "Are you happy with your kingdom?" Penelope leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her heart. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she admitted. "When I arrived in Oregon City last fall, I had nothing but a carpetbag and a desperate hope that my uncle would take me in. Now look at all this." She gestured to the beautiful home, the budding garden, and beyond that, to where Horace sat on his own porch, whittling what looked suspiciously like a toy horse. "You made it happen," Vincent said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Your courage, your refusal to accept the limitations others tried to place on you, that's what changed everything." "We made it happen," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "Together." As darkness settled fully around them, the lanterns glowed like beacons, welcoming any who might venture their way, a promise of shelter, acceptance, and love that extended far beyond the physical structures they had built. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as they continued to build their life together. But for now, in this perfect moment, Penelope Taylor Wells knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the hearts of those who loved her without condition or reservation. As Vincent led her inside, closing the door gently behind them, the lantern continued its faithful vigil, a silent testament to the power of love to overcome prejudice, and the enduring truth that home is wherever we are truly accepted for who we are. In the years that followed, the Wells farm became known throughout the region for its hospitality and the quality of its produce. Vincent continued his blacksmith work, building a small forge on the property and taking on apprentices from town. Penelope, after the birth of their son Edward Horace Wells, established a small school in one of the outbuildings, offering education to children regardless of background or circumstance. Horace lived to see his great-nephews and nieces grow. Edward was followed by twin girls, Martha and Victoria, and finally another boy, William. The old man became a beloved figure to the children of the area, teaching them the ways of the forest and the stories of those who had lived on the land before settlers arrived. And every evening, without fail, the lanterns were lit beacons of welcome in a world that sometimes forgot the simple power of acceptance and the enduring strength of love freely given and gratefully received.